Let's bring in the former Deputy Prime Minister of this great country, former Nationals leader John Anderson. He joins me live from Melbourne. Thanks for joining us again, John. We'll get to that energy debate in a moment. But first up, you must be pulling your hair out watching the leadership struggle unfold in your own party.
Well, I do despair, and I'm very concerned about it. I've always believed that you sort your differences out behind closed doors, you go out and present a unified front. We know the cost of disunity in politics, but what really worries me about this is that it reflects the tribalism, the polarisation, the fracturing of our societies, and it's really, in the end, you know, it's the product of identity politics. Just stop and think for a moment back to the way in which those words of Kennedy's were, you know, celebrated by everybody around the world. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It's a call to commonality, to the common good, to universalism, the things we have in common, let's move forward together. We don't ask that anymore. We apparently insist that we're all victims.
So
in fact, so many of us are victims, I wonder who can solve, who now can help meet the victims' needs. Yeah, what I'm really saying is that we need to focus on what we have in common and put aside this endless pursuit of self-interest.
Yes, and you're saying put the common good, the greater good first. So are you saying that both Michael McCormack and Barnaby Joyce are putting their own interests in front of the greater good?
I think I'd make it as a blanket statement. I'd say that all of us, I think, outside of politics now, you know, I don't claim to be sinless. I'm sure I've made many, many failings, but I just think at a time like this, when I think Australia's quite vulnerable on many fronts, we face enormous challenges. It's those things which we all as Australians need to focus on that should have us pulling together rather than dividing along identity politics lines.
Well, Michael McCormack has given an interview to Channel 9 Media today. Chris Allman had a chat with him this afternoon. Let me just show you a snippet from that interview where Michael McCormack is talking about the fact that he's digging in.
You haven't seen just how much of a fighter I am. I'm determined to continue to do the job that I have done for 2 years. I've got the support of the majority of my party.
So he's going to dig in, John Anderson. Can he do that, or are the signs there obvious now that Barnaby will be back at some stage?
He's just been re-elected. He has to dig in. He's been given the support. He's been given the go-ahead. He has no option. Let me make one other comment, though. There are too many people in Australia who do a nice line in hate. Let me be frank about it. We pile on. And I will say this about Michael McCormack and indeed the Prime Minister. Both have been under massive pressure. I think both have displayed character. They've not been personal in their responses in the way that many of their attackers have been. Both have shown a courage under fire that I think all of us should note, frankly.
Well, the thing is that Michael McCormack is now coming under attack, presumably leaks from within his own party, people trying to get him caught up in a MP's travel expenses scandal. Andrew Clennell had another element of that on our station today, a suggestion that he'd timed a visit to Brisbane to coincide with the State of Origin game. And there was the issue that was broken by Renee Valaris today about the Nats next month organising a meeting in Melbourne so that they could all travel to the centenary dinner of your party at taxpayers' expense. That has now apparently been kiboshed. Here's Michael McCormack on that point.
To be perfectly honest, I've had nothing to do with the organisation of...
You didn't know about it? You didn't know about it?
Well, I knew the centenary...
When did you know about it?
The centenary dinner?
The arrangements for the centenary...
No, I don't have anything to do with the arrangements of the dinner. Well, taxpayers won't be funding the arrangement because I've made clear that that the members, if they want to go, if they want to attend, should pay for themselves.
Well, apparently that is fixed now, as we just heard there, John Anderson, but this is the sort of stuff that just turns voters way off politics, isn't it?
Look, Chris, let me put it to you this way. The reality that now confronts us right across the Western world is that people are losing trust in our institutions and in the people who make them up. Without a restoration of trust, our democracy is quite frankly at risk. When people don't trust they will go for the rule book. When they don't think people will do what they ought to do without coercion, they'll say, well, we'll have to coerce them. The loss is, in fact, our freedoms over time. So I think we're all in this together. I don't want to be in the business of throwing stones. All of us need to recognise we have something, if you want to talk about national emergencies, in common with most Western countries, a breakdown in trust. We have to move to restore trust, and I think Michael has made the right decision in relation to that particular issue. It was never going to be understood.
Absolutely. As you know, John, I love to talk the big policy challenges with you, both domestically and internationally. But we're distracted from that. The whole of the political discourse is distracted from that by this sort of leadership disunity and this sort of rorting scandal, and it is a real problem for it. So I just want to get your thoughts before we move on the big picture issue that's emerged really on the policy front over the past couple of months, and that is climate action yet again. Is the coalition being sucked back into a climate policy debate that we all thought had been settled, especially in the lead up to the last election and in the result of the election last year?
Chris, you'll never get good public policy without a good debate. If the debate's truncated, if it's hijacked by emotion, if there's a loss of reason, a lack of commitment to evidence, you're never going to get good policy. It's not going to happen. We need to all calm down, every one of us. Look, I'm a farmer with a sixth generation on one side, fifth on the other. I want my son and my grandson to be able to follow me into that occupation. So I have a vested interest in trying to ensure that we can deal effectively with changes in climate. Now, they've always happened in Australia, but we have to be able to adapt to them. We have to be able to respond to the evidence. We have to develop rational approaches.
Rational is the key, John. Rational is the key. And what we're seeing here, it looks like, is because of a terrible summer of bushfires and a lot of attempts by political activists and politicians to use that to push their climate policy agenda, you've got certainly at least moderate Liberals suddenly want to overreact to that, rather than have a look at the rational policies and the targets that have been in place for a number of years now.
Well, they've simply got to argue the need to return to rationality. Look, I'll say this. The pile-on the Prime Minister by some people in recent months, I think, tells you that something very ugly is happening in Australia. We have not been a race of nation of haters. And despite all of the anti-discrimination laws that we've piled on ourselves and, you know, hate speech and all the rest of it since the early 70s, I've never seen anything like this. And furthermore, when he apologises, it seems we're unable to accept an apology. We have to take the heat and the emotion. We've got to say to people, we're doing too good a line in hate and not enough in reason. Now, I think there are some, actually, I'll go this far, there are some challenges that we confront, but there are also some really exciting opportunities. And I tell you what, I reckon that in land and water management in this country, we can not only do a great deal to do something that everybody seems to overlook, which is to absorb more carbon. Just happens that regardless of where you stand on the carbon debate, frankly, we can do a lot more in terms of the way we manage our land here and globally that will produce better agricultural and financial and even food quality outcomes and absorb carbon. Now, there's just one area that we ought to be really focusing on. I suspect that a lot of people don't want to focus on what we can do in a positive sense because their real agendas lie elsewhere. And I think that is deeply concerning to, hackneyed phrase I know, but to quiet Australians out there who say, hang on, you know, where is this going? Where does the hatred, where does the vitriol, where does the emotion end? And when do we come to some practical realities? Australia has no choice but to adapt, by the way. We can do what we like to reduce our emissions or absorb more carbon, but the reality is we also have to adapt because we will not be able to influence events in any meaningful way. The chief scientist, don't take it from me, you quoted him a moment ago, the chief scientist no less acknowledges that. But let's go for where we can show the world what we can do technologically to sequester more carbon in our soils, to lead the way on new forms of energy that are not crippled by the intermittent nature of renewables as we currently see them.
Just briefly, John Anderson, that gets back, when you talk about the political problems Scott Morrison has had, has he lacked support from a Deputy Prime Minister? Has Michael McCormack been too invisible and this leadership stoush and all the personal entities around that. Does he need to fix that by being more assertive, more visible for Nationals and their supporters and for his Prime Minister around the country?
Look, I've seen a step up from Michael McCormack. You showed a bit of a clip of that where he was showing some determination. What he needs is to people now to muscle around. If he is their chosen leader, then you need to get in there behind him and let him step up and do that job. The PM needs strong support from all of his team. We need good governance. The country is... Look, frankly, we're comatose in many ways as a people. We need to recognise climate change is one of many issues. Coming out of drought, what do we do now to manage our water and our land more effectively? Where do we build better infrastructure to manage water and the upcoming challenges? The global strategic and economic environment is very uncertain. This is a time to pull together, and that includes our representatives, in my view. Easy for me to say, I'm out of it. I don't want to throw rocks from the sidelines. I don't want to pretend that I always had it right for a moment. I just want to say that everywhere I go in Australia, people are longing for a restoration of trust, teamwork and integrity.
They are indeed, John Anderson. You need to whip them into gear. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Chris.